All right, well, this is Esoteric Origins, and I am Tom Denney, and I am accompanied by my wonderful guest today, Ben Axiom. Ben, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you very much. It's like a split podcast. I'm inviting you also, Tom, to be on the Tantra Punk podcast, and
I like that. This should definitely go to both. Now, there's a very specific reason why you wanted to come over today and talk to me, because you have a very big and important story to tell. But let me just validate my perspective on you as being, when I first moved out to LA, as we were just discussing, it's been about a decade now. I moved out in 2005, and you were one of the first people that I met here, and we were just figuring out that, in fact, it was the MySpace days, and it must have been within the first week of me moving here, because I had to go to my roommate and use his computer to log on to MySpace, and that's when you messaged me and invited me out to the Troubadour, and that was the first time I had been to the Troubadour, and got introduced to the LA Grindcore punk scene. And from there, you were also doing punk rock gardening in Long Beach.
Yeah.
And you also invited me down there, and it was all totally new to me at that time. The LA punk experience is a lot different than Chicago. I think it's deeper and more intrinsic. And out here on the West Coast, I find that the punks are a lot more conscientious about recycling, planting trees, and especially writing conscious music. And I felt like at the time you were at the forefront of that, because you were actually leading a youth organization in Long Beach that was focused on recycling and on planting organic foods, and on you were just teaching the local punk kids how to garden. And I thought that was really awesome.
Yeah, man, thanks so much. Those are the good old days for sure.
So initially, even before then, that was your and in that band, half of them were Native Americans, and the songs were about Native rights and such, a resistant culture.
Right.
But before that, you had gained a level of infamy with Axiom. Mm-hmm. What's the history of Axiom? Because I had heard from other people that it's this weird artistic ramblings of a drugged out kid, and there's pictures of you all distorted in black and white, with dreads and patches holding dreads together. And why don't you tell me a little bit about those days and where all that came from?
All right, sure, man. Yeah. Axiom was the first band that I kind of co-founded back when, I guess, some of us were about 14, 15.
Well, what year was that?
95, 96. Yeah, and it was basically a high school punk band, and we started getting together and jamming, and put out a few albums, did a bit of touring, and had a kind of ill-fated, tragic breakup over it's a long story. I'll spare the details, but just some betrayal happened that was unforgivable, or at least unexcusable, and we had to split right when we recorded a full-length album. We had to split up around that time, so we had to let our vocalist go. But we recorded a whole album worth of instruments, and it's finally coming out now. So there's like a 15-year-old buried album that we finally got some vocals on that's about to be released.
And now it seems easier than back then to find this, because it's on YouTube, and it's actually really great Crust music. So what was your mindset back then when you were recording that and running around, and how did you make the journey from that kid to where you are now?
Well, it was cool, because a lot of us were heavily involved in local progressive activist causes and movements and stuff, so we were trying to use it as a tool to raise consciousness and get punks out to protests and involved in DIY projects and stuff. So obviously when there's different energies at different ages in your life, so I feel like we were running that energy of extreme utopian idealism and passion and fire for change. And, as you kind of throw yourself against the system and usually get chewed up and spit out, after a while. And it's easy for a lot of people to burn out and get real nihilistic and just get really over drugged out or, drinking, constantly just to numb the pain. Because once you get disillusioned, it's kind of like in the Matrix, sometimes you want to go back to ignorance, but you can't. You're sort of switched on. So now I feel like I've kind of found a more spiritual path of resistance, and I feel like there's more leverage on in the invisible dimensions of reality than there are in the visible dimensions that are highly controlled by different forms of authoritarian systems and agencies and whatnot. So really, like I kind of felt after a number of years of fighting on the surface of reality and having it be very futile because of the mechanical advantage of force on the physical plane, that the owners, the sort of the power elite and all of their henchmen, all of that empire, all those structures of empire are really impermeable, toe to toe, but in the more malleable astral dimensions of reality, there's a lot more and bigger and more powerful spiritual allies that are, I think, starting to come to this planet more and more to help dislodge the infection, the demonic infection that is it manifests in building empires of male ego. That's the physical dimension of it, but
there's
spiritual.
Tons of evidence that the people who are in charge of that empire that you're talking about, the system that it's in place, they're actually doing rituals themselves.
Right.
And even on the most simplistic levels, like the local law enforcement who are Freemasons, or the local judge who's a proud Mason, well, in the confines of those Masonic lodges, they're in the basement doing rituals and summoning entities,
right,
and looking into the ancient books of summoning demons, essentially. They look up to Solomon, and Solomon was renowned for being a necromancer and a demon summoner. And that was how the Temple of Israel was supposedly built, by enslaved entities on this other level. And wouldn't you say that is the symbol of the pyramid, the eye in the pyramid that they're using on everything?
Well, I personally am sort of try to think like an anthropologist about all this stuff, in the sense of there's try to keep an open-ended perspective on things, and so I'm just kind of dancing around committing to saying as a fact, like trying to speak in more inquisitive terms about these more esoteric subjects. If someone asks me, what do I think about, or do I believe in this or that specific sort of conclusion about symbols and stuff, I'm going to say that, as far as I'm concerned, if you're not this is kind of where I've arrived at from a proactive place. It's like there's psychedelic goddess worship, and then there's everything else that isn't that, which is mostly the patriarchal empire, because shamanic cultures that honor the earth and that use sacraments to be connected to the consciousness of the planet, the feminine life-giving consciousness of the planet, whether they're ingesting the sacraments or they're entering altered states by some other means, they're essentially protecting and safeguarding their cultures and their minds and their egos from that looming threat of sort of hyper masculine, greedy, territorial, violent, aggressive, manipulative, empire building impulse. And so whatever it is, if it's not psychedelic goddess worship, I don't want anything to do with it.
So that's interesting as to why you gravitate towards my art, and it was through my art that you first approached me. And in fact, one of the pieces that you were talking about was, and I didn't really tap into like that term psychedelic goddess. I all I knew was that I wanted to draw very beautiful women surrounded by like centipedes and fighting off these what looked like mosquito larvae and stuff like that, and it was all very I'm not sure where it came from, other than to say my own psychedelic journeys, which is not a lot. I've maybe done deep psychedelics maybe 12 to 20 times ever, but I can't ever say that like I came face to face with any of these entities that I'm drawing, and I'm not really sure where they're coming from. But you seem to see something totally deeper in them. Why don't you tell me what it is that you see when we're talking about this?
Okay, yeah. Well, first I want to say, it's been such a blessing and a miracle and an exquisite joy to be, a connoisseur of your artwork, and I feel like what you're seeing and transmitting truths from your third eye perspective, and you have an innate natural ability to be an antenna for this sort of multi-dimensional perspective on what's actually happening, and in what would be totally invisible to most non-artists and non-psychedelic explorers or psychonauts. It's between the psychonauts who maybe don't have the artistic ability to convey that through drawing, and then it's the artists who are the visionary artists, whether they're consuming sacraments or not, with the ability to download and sort of share and demonstrate what the true, I want to use the word astral ecology, and if we know as much about astral ecology as we do about, let's say, earthly, ecological biological ecology on this plane of the reality of the earth, then we're gonna make wiser decisions about how we build cultures and who we let be in control of those cultures, and how we run political systems when we have the kind of awareness of the astral ecology that you're helping to bring forth. So I just want to thank you for that, and say it's a blessing to see it. And I feel like we're on almost a completely parallel journey of discovery, because every time I have a new psychedelic revelation, I look at your website and you've like depicted it already in a parallel process. And it just yesterday I was like sharing your art with someone, and I was like, oh, I hadn't seen this. Oh, that's what I just experienced, a couple weeks ago.
That is so weird. So you're taking psychedelic journeys, and I see, for me, it's all just coming from the imagination. However, a lot of the stuff I do really late, like right before bed. I have an exercise where...
The theta state, yeah.
It's like when I'm so exhausted that I'm ready to hit the pillow, I think, well, if I just, draw at least 2 things, and then the next morning I'm like, what did I draw? Who drew this? Sometimes I don't even recognize these things, and wow. It's a great way to get cool imagery, and... but for me, it's all just like stuff that's coming, out of nowhere, and just so.
You're being possessed by the spirit of what wants to be conveyed, probably,
Well,
in a good way.
I've been told that before, so I don't mind being that kind of channel.
Yeah, beautiful.
So this astro ecology, from my perspective,
or astral with an L, yeah.
Oh, astral. Okay,
yeah.
So the astral realm is that place that you go to when you're dreaming, or is
That's
it something?
Part of it, yeah.
Okay, and okay, so I'm trying to articulate what I believe is a lot of problems with people and their psychosis is actually parasitic thought beings.
Exactly.
And I guess a lot of this comes from my research into Hindu philosophy, where they talk about these entities that would descend upon people who are sad or depressed, and the whole idea that these entities are feeding off of negative energy, and they're feeding off of sadness, they're feeding off of anger, and they're feeding off of depression. I find completely terrifying, more terrifying than inverting a Christian cross, as far as like if you want to create some really because I grew up on heavy metal and drawing pentagrams and whatever, but I'm like, what's even more intense is showing someone that's actually possessed of these entities, who are just and like any parasite, it will feed the need for that food source. And if it's a thought form, and you're possessed with one of these entities, it's going to feed you negative thoughts that keep you in that state of depression. Versus humans have this ability to choose their state of mind and choose how they feel about things. And I think a lot of the battle against depression, which I feel depression is more of an enemy to modern humans than anyone wants to admit, discuss, or even approach.
Right.
And I think that a lot of work can be done by purging yourself of these, and you could call it, well, it's just a negative thought form, or you could say, well, it's an astral being. Or you can say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and just stop choosing to be sad, or stop letting that affect you. And once I started messing around with those ideas, examples of people who were functioning on that exact level kept coming into my life to show me, like, wow, this person, if anyone is suffering from this idea, it's clearly this person who like lashes out and will manipulate, or in any variety of ways, and that whole idea became really evident that there is energy vampirism. That's exactly what's happening, and you can even feel it when you say, oh, something's come over me, and you just get laden with this depression that you can't even, like, why am I depressed? The sun is out, there's it's almost intangible, and you're just like this. And I find myself needing to battle with that often enough, and so that way I kind of work it out through my artwork. And but to hear you validate it and say that this is a vision into a real place and real things that are going on is kind of mind-blowing, even for me.
Well, you have it depicted. Yeah, we're certainly on the same frequency and vibration of bringing in the understanding of what's going on. It's not
just imagination.
It's not just imagination. It's not just a cartoon mythology. It is an ecological reality, and my personal experience, which I'll try to be careful not to make any projections or extrapolate beyond my personal experience. But my personal experience has forced me to do the research to try to understand it and to look at different modern scientific and ancient shamanic and esoteric epistemologies, really, to understand.
So your whole context. Your whole theory is that this is an actual unexplored science.
Well, the modern science is completely afraid of the implications of the can of worms, the Pandora's box of acknowledging the spirit world. If you acknowledge the spirit world, atheism, and the idea that you can torture animals and have them scream and be like machines. I mean, the death of nature, the removal of spirit from nature is what has justified the mechanical, industrial enslavement of all forms of life. So to have to be held accountable to sentience on an undeniable level of awareness of this reality, this deeper, especially in the way karma works. I mean, if you think that you don't attract these entities when you do wrong and you hurt and you harm, you're going to have to, the revolution will be, a psychedelic revolution will reveal the reality that what the concepts of karma are. It's like, well, if you have faith, if you believe that this system is actually at play, what goes around comes around, if you believe that on faith, hopefully you'll be graceful in the way you act towards life on earth and other people and yourself. But if you don't believe that, you may just
and they say for like butchers at a butcher shop, they say it gets easier as you go on. Like the first couple kills might be difficult, but eventually you get used to it. So do you think maybe as someone is doing that, torturing animals for the. I mean, a lot of people benefit from the proteins, but the way they do it is actually horrific. And the point being that if you're continuously doing that, do you think it weakens your aura so that entities that feed off of your perversion of this life cycle feed off of that?
Yeah, I mean, what I have observed, and I'll make this comment, and then I'll see if you want to have me just do the sequential, just laying out the events, the actual events that have given me this sort of life change direction in life. I'll say yes, absolutely. There is more hell growing off of each one of our energy systems than you can measure. We think of ourselves in the modern scientific medical anatomy sort of reductionistic view of the scope of our beings. We just see ourselves as like one person walking around. If I didn't, axe murder somebody today, then I'm, doing all right or whatever. But really, if you're sitting all day resenting someone or being jealous of someone or hating someone or stalking someone or whatever you're doing, that vibration, let's say, is like bleeding in shark-infested waters, and you're going to draw more of the dark entities into your energy field because of what you're emanating and what you're exuding into the invisible space of the astral plane, or you could say the lower astral plane, and that's why, yeah, exactly. If you're chronically unconsciously being depressed or being in any way, thinking harmful or behaving harmful, there's thought, deed, and action and speech. Speech and thought and action. Those are your dimensions of influence, of things and energies around you. So taking responsibility for those levels, and that's what most of the mystical traditions are about, purifying that so that you can be more of a net producer of positive light energy that's going to disinfect and create safety and protection around you and your family and your loved ones and your community. And you should be practicing lots of ecstatic.
So good feeling thoughts are very important in this the waters that we're dwelling in, that we don't even realize that we're going through swamps. Whereas like in the real life, you know that you shouldn't go through a swamp because there's leeches, mosquitoes, ticks, and alligators, and all types of things that like to feed off of your blood, and which is your life source. But what we would be horrified to take into account is that we're walking in that daily with unseen elements that are looking to break into our auric egg and feed off of our essence, not just blood related, but just energy, which life source, which might even be more important.
Right. Well, that's why I say, that dimension is even bigger or more expansive, let's say, than like if your mind is covered with sores that are infected, the density of the ecology around what you're bleeding out and the infection of those psychic sores is basically creating a whole, planet, every person is walking around with like a planet of hell that they're responsible for giving life to. It's parasitically jacked into, and like you said, the thought form entities, they're jacked into the nervous system, and they're like spammers or hackers, and they can give you impulses, they can give you perversions, they can run you and manipulate you. And obviously the ultimate form of possession is to be completely hollowed out and completely blacked out, and to be just a vessel of the illest will that you can imagine. And there's plenty of that stuff happening more rapidly now in the modern society, where people are just so completely deformed and fractured that there's really nothing of a moral fiber left in them,
Well, and that's when you say, well, that person's soulless, and you almost say it jokingly, like you would about a terrible boss or a teacher or an IRS agent. You're like, oh, totally soulless. Yeah. So what you're suggesting is that the human body is just like a computer that can get installed with spyware and viruses that are spamming information or allowing outside sources into your home computer, which everyone can understand, but you're suggesting that our minds work this way too.
Yeah, there's lots of ports, and you want to have firewalls set up. That's what all spiritual traditions and, everything from shamanic ceremonies where it's like you walk in a certain direction, you honor the directions, you call in the ancestors, you call in your allies, and you create sacred and safe spaces for ritual healing. And that's really there's to turn your back on the spirit world is really to your peril. I mean, that's what the modern world is all about, just ignoring the karmic consequences of endless consumption, of endless pollution, of endless ego gratification and sense gratification that is like out of balance with spiritual practice and charity and giving and generosity, the virtues, compassion.
And when you watch TV, it seems like the people who are making commercials and who are profiting would profit even more from you keeping shut down like that, and just buying the next cheeseburger and throwing away your old phone and getting a new one and staying in this. It seems beneficial to these hackers, these firewall worms. They even call them worms in the computer tech world. Yeah. So it seems like we're walking through this, where everything is trying to keep you shut down and use it as a simple vessel to shut off your individuality and your creativity. Yeah. Boy, a lot of what television is getting you to shut down your imagination and let me tell you a story. Don't think, and so many people are obsessed with this. Well, I can't wait to go home and watch my shows, so my programming, and so that they don't have to think and they don't have to use their own imagination. And I think when you are tapping into your imagination, which I've had the benefit of doing, creating a career out of it, so that I'm constantly, in order to pay my bills, I'm dipping into these deep creative realms, which brings me to this same conclusion that you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, this is it's all in the movie They Live, the sci-fi film from the 80s, where if you were to replace those glasses that they use as a metaphor for what I would call like activation of the pineal gland, that is exactly what you're able to see is the true degree to which an individual has been infested, and whether or not, basically, I mean, if you consider the analogy of those glasses and They Live to actually be the psychedelic experience, or the use of psilocybin mushrooms, for example, to activate the third eye, that gives you the periscope. Your pineal gland is basically a periscope into the astral plane, and it has been systematically
Shut down,
chemically, through conditioning, through just even the process of being told that your imaginary friends aren't real or whatever. There's things that just close down the access to the imaginal realm, and as adults living in modern society, have become so rigid and so closed off that we don't. You use it or you lose it, basically, or use it or lose it. So the atrophy of the pineal gland and the third eye perspective, which is, every Hindu with a red dot on their forehead, that's so that they remember. I mean, I'm going to be cautious how I speak about another religion, but I'll say that that's not a mistake. And what they describe as species of demons descending upon the earth in this dark demonic age they call the Kali Yuga, where we're going to need tantric warriors to fight back and to protect, humanity and the earth and the beauty of creation, and as it's being, observed by the gods and goddesses higher up in the astral higher planes. They're observing this sick infection of the planet, and they gave scriptures, or we could say that scriptures were channeled by psychedelic psychonauts who were performing, sexual yoga, and ascending through their nervous systems and through their chakra systems, and working with the Kundalini as a medical force. It's no coincidence that the symbol that you see on ambulances is the three channels and the Kundalini serpent rising up. That's
real medicine.
Real medicine, yeah, disinfection of your soul. So, taking a revolutionary and activist approach to this situation, very much like, again, borrowing from the ideology of They Live, which is like, that was a very interesting synthesis of radical leftist critique of industrial capitalism and the spiritual ecology or the astral ecology, where they're looking at like interdimensionality, and in their meetings that were kind of like demonstrated depicted as like similar to these occult lodge meetings, let's say, they're really bringing it together, the exploitation of humans and
there was a
and
blind
plants.
priest.
Right.
He couldn't see the real world, but he could see them.
Had greater perception into the astral. Yeah.
That is how did you come into this understanding that we're talking about now, and when did that shift happen? And what's that whole story?
Okay, now we're gonna get into some painful, but I've spent a lot of time processing this, so I'm gonna state where I can speak very clinically about it. So please don't worry about my, sense of personal disclosure. I feel like my allies in the spirit world have prepared me to put this stuff on record, for in this way, really for the first time. But we've set it up and established this discourse very well already, so this should now start to make sense to people, and it will make, this is how I arrived at it personally, and because you're the artist of my dreams, who I would want to manifest the ability for you to be able to depict these pivotal experiences in my life, so that other people can avoid these pitfalls. This is like, I had to descend into the hell realms and go on shamanic journeys to pull back and to come back with these understandings. So it's been painful, but it's not in vain, and I feel like it needs to be told and depicted to prevent future misadventure into the dark realms. That's what my goal is by sharing this. So I'm just gonna really not put a lot of analysis into it, and not really put a lot of higher level thinking into it, and just try to stick to the facts and the actual depiction of the scenarios as they happen, and then you can kind of ask me more higher level thought questions about it later. So here's the first scene, let's say, that pulls it together. I'm 13 years old. I'm a street punk living on a skateboard, addicted to intravenous methamphetamine, and my street brothers have peer pressured me to start turning tricks to get drug money for our little street tribe of brotherhood. And I did not know what I was getting into. I had no spiritual consciousness or training. I was, I had some interest in psychedelic shamanism, and I was actually not wanting to get swallowed into the meth hell realms. I was seeking the mushroom, the acid, the peyote, the psychedelic shamanism, or this experience of the spirit world that you would get from a more maybe not acid, but at least the plant-based hallucinogens,
which are not as easy to find as meth, apparently, huh?
Well, yeah, it was my intention being on the street was to get away from the latchkey home life that I had, and to find a tribe. And I found punk rock, and so I found family in that, where I didn't have it at home. And I also started to break down the illusions of the American dream and start to develop a radical consciousness. But I also had the desire to explore the spirit world, and to find the source, and to find the ancestors, and to feel the beauty and the love that is the allies in the spirit world that want to heal us and want to give us infinite love and power. to heal the planet. So that was my intention, was to go there, but I was derailed and sucked into the dark realm of meth prostitution, male prostitution in San Francisco as a 13-year-old, because of being skewed into what was the dominant drug on the street. They weren't hippies doing a bunch of, kumbaya drumming and stuff. They were punks, they were aggro, they were violent, and it wasn't just booze, it was meth. And it was a real misadventure that I strongly discourage anyone from continuing or starting on the path of using those drugs. And here's why. And then this is where we get into like something that would, pop out of one of your paintings. And I don't think, it's painful and grotesque, but it is part of what we have to own about what's happening on the earth. And it affects all sex workers and all, models and anyone who's being used as a piece of meat for sexual gratification by anybody, so here's the nuts and bolts. My soul was shattered after or during multiple days and maybe weeks of basically being brainwashed and raped by demons, inside and out, being drugged unconscious and basically made, into a sort of satanic ritual abuse object of extreme.
And these were just Johns who were picking you up and picking up a 13-year-old boy in San Francisco?
Yeah, but they were, I had a number of clients, you could say, and some of them were very, just sort of nerdy guys who probably didn't get laid in high school, and now they've sort of fallen into a trap of this dark side activity, but they weren't, let's say, dark lords of the underworld who were, manipulating children on the street to be in their cults and do whatever for them, right? They were just like normal professional people who had this dark side shadow nightlife that they would go down and indulge in. But what I'm talking about in this scene, let's say, is, very intentional, very highly demonic, sort of high-ranking, demonic-infested, possessed men who were like actually, intelligently using this black magic sorcery to rip open, young, and I was a virgin at the time, so my soul was shattered before I even had made love to a woman, which would have been my preference. But their intention, which I was able to see from an astral perspective of being up for days and sort of melting into the other side, that these demonic possessed men were actually not just having their way with me, sexually for their own sort of getting off purposes, but their possessing demonic entities were actually ripping open the chakra protective webs and inserting their larvae into my energy field. And this was the act of infestation, of my energy system, and as almost as a form of like black sex magic surgery of implantation. And I saw translucent spiders come down from the walls, and then I was blacked out, and I don't even know, now really what else mechanically was actually done. But that's just one situation. I have been sexually abused in other contexts even earlier in life, and I wouldn't have suspected that was what was going on, but because I was given such a sharp, clear perspective into what it was that these men were actually being possessed to do. I mean, this is not evolutionary reproductive sexual activity. It's not like they're trying to impregnate a woman and have a child. They are doing some sort of activity, and it's not that it's homosexual and that makes it wrong either. It was the fact that they were not loving, and that they were operating at like an insect or like a reptilian level of extraction, or let's say or abuse or exploitation. It was not consensual, it was not ethical, and it was not loving, and it was a lower vibrational act. And these were lower vibrational acts that were actually allowing for this astral level transmission of entities that I didn't know. So I wasn't asked if I wanted to be a carrier, or if I wanted to be a host, if I wanted to be made into this like breeding ground for demonic entities, and so it just, my soul was gone, but I didn't know waking up the next day, or a chunk of it's gone, or however, whatever percentage of it had left the body, and in that moment of extreme trauma, it left, parts of the soul left the body, and so that was one scene. That's one, that's several panels of a comic right there, like what that looked like to have been shattered and abused and then infected and infested with astral larvae. And okay, good?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was one revelatory scene, and I didn't even really grapple with the significance of it until only about a year or so ago. So let's fast forward 20 years, and let's say that unknowingly for 20 years, I'm battling the symptoms of PTSD. I have just a general malaise and feeling just low energy and feeling very hostile and sarcastic and negative, and just had.
And you were trying to fill that with the music you were playing and trying to beat the system by growing turnips in your backyard.
yeah, bringing in prana, natural prana to heal.
But you didn't. You at the time weren't 100% aware of what you were trying to heal, other than
exactly. Yeah, you don't know what is living inside of you, gestating inside of you as a survivor of sexual abuse. So you're just battling day to day, sort of the anger, the resentment, and it manifests as personality disorders, eating disorders. All kinds of neuroses are sort of the side effects or the handiwork, really, of whatever is inside of you, and they will find whatever fractures and weak points to exploit. And it's luckily in the 20 years between that one incident of many like it while I was on the street, I was on and off the street for a couple of years, but that period of high concentrated interaction with the demonic realm in that way was several months of that was my lifestyle. I mean, every day I was going out, or every night I was going out and unknowingly taking on a bigger parasite load by being of service to these men, and just still wanting to just go beyond that and go find the beauty and find the ancestors and the goddesses and all of the beauty that's out there. But I was absolutely imprisoned and stuck and encrusted over with this reef of demonic habitat, so that demonic habitat, the reef that is growing from all of your pain and anxiety, they're just tearing and digging at you. I mean, they're just clawing at you. So
when you say a reef, I'm thinking of an endless, what looks like, that scene from Alien where you can find all the pods and just creatures that are,
looks like.
And a similar vision that comes to mind is, if anyone knows the Sepultura album, Arise.
Yep, exactly.
And
I was listening to that album at that time and I was fighting those parasitic entities face to face, in my, I would get a motel room for the night, and then I would play Sepultura, or I would play Doom, and I would build shamanic energy, and I would fight and resist and struggle and do a sort of shamanic dancing, spiritual kung fu kind of ritual to protect myself and to fight back. But it was not, that was...
So your chakras were basically encrusted with this infinite landscape of what the Sepultura album cover looks like.
Exactly.
Just these clawed... centipede-like, and what, they were just making you depressed, or they wanted you to be sad?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is my salvation, I would say, is that beautiful goddess lovers came into my life as angels and helped to bring in that Shakti, what it would be called in Sanskrit and in the Hindu yoga and Tantra traditions, and there's other words for it in other languages, but I've gravitated towards the Tantra healing modality and life path has, I would say, found me in because I have it's been a beautiful synchronicity to find that path, because that was what I feel like has helped me repair the tissue and to start to have the deep healing that you need. It comes from divine feminine energy, and that's what the Kundalini serpent rising disinfectant effect is a manifestation of the healing power of divine feminine energy or Shakti. So making you sad, making you neurotic, making you cut yourself, making you have an eating disorder, whatever it is. And then in the worst cases, which thankfully in my case this has not been an effect for me, is that this type of, sexual abuse in families cascading through generations, it's not what runs in the family, it's what crawls in the family, and it crawls the DNA line. And so you could say that they're hacking the DNA, and that they're domesticating humans to become more and more susceptible to all kinds of neurotic and dysfunctional behavior. And the sexual demons that are species unto themselves within that ecology are just tooled to wreak havoc in certain areas, so really it's there.
And so you're suggesting that scientifically they say a molested person is more likely to grow up to be a molester, but what you're saying is that it's some an entity encoded within the DNA, and that it's been passed down from father to daughter to son again for who knows how long.
It's beyond human. It's transhuman.
That's terrifying on so many levels. So
it's
the
like
cycle
lice.
of abuse just continues and continues, and probably can be stretched back for eons.
I would say, since the fabric of the fabric of healthy shamanized traditional culture village, the fabric of the village being splintered into the individual ego, which by yourself anyone is susceptible to start hearing voices and starting to act on them. The process of being urbanized and civilized is the process of fragmenting the fabric of village life and putting us all into a relationship with the demonic realm where we're completely defenseless, and we're consuming pharmaceuticals and alcohol and other, alcohol isn't always bad, but it should be guarded against its in excess, because there's entry points, and there are a number of ways that generational curses are passed down, a number of ways that new opportunities, they're opportunistic parasites, and they're scanning everything, and they're around us everywhere. That it's like they know when we are susceptible to their infection, and there's, that's what, being so-called holy is supposed to be, like, guidelines for how to protect yourself against that looming threat that's always there. But I really feel like, as far as, how long this goes back, I'd say that if you were, let's look at the Earth from the moon, and you're one of these demonic mosquito entities, right? Just kind of like strolling through the galaxy, going like, where can I get a snack? And you go to Earth, 10,000 years ago, everyone's hunting, gathering, singing and dancing, shaking off any of the parasites that try to get onto them. They're ecstatic trance dancing, using psychedelics, loving each other, caring for the Earth. They're impervious to those attacks. They're not sinning enough to be fractured and open enough for that to happen. So the some sort of, this is a totally different discussion to get into, but let's say domestication and civilization was what cracked open and allowed for this deeper infestation to happen. So if you're a demon floating around now, you're like, oh, where do you go to get a free lunch? It's Earth, because all the human souls are basically bent over and basically already sort of jacked into. So,
and now if you're in the urban setting, you're this new push of sexualization of the children, where with especially this twerking, and they've got 9-year-olds on television twerking, and this I can't think that it's good. I think that it's breeding this new. Yep. Whereas like 50 years ago, it would have been inconceivable, immoral, and censored, and now it's on daytime television.
This is where like it's been shocking. A lot of this is shocking, but for me, I as a punk anarchist, anti-authoritarian free thinker, I've bucked the religious impulse, and just sort of rejected flat out any system of religion because of how much really it's been perverted and corrupted to actually serve the demonic realm and to create more fear, more violence, and more opportunities for them to spread. So it's really the
trick
biggest betrayal.
That you should join the military and fight for freedom, and that somehow you're exonerated and you could kill the enemy, in quotes, and not face any repercussions. I think this is such a bizarre mentality.
Yeah, there's so many different species that are each responsible for different patterns of behavior. You could say that there are species behind every eating disorder, species behind every impulse to harm anything, and this is why we need to get a National Geographic style level of taking this seriously as phenomenological fact. I mean, this isn't just eating acid and seeing dancing bears and Mickey Mouse. This is real serious ecological fact and phenomenological fact that psychedelic shamans for eons, for many more millennia than this dark age that we're in, they have been interacting with the bad spirits, the parasitic entities. So we're to bridge the gap. You have demons. Okay, you have religions call them demons. Psychedelic shaman would call them bad spirits, and a modern scholar of psychedelic shamanism who wants to translate it into modern medical science would say these are transdimensional parasitic organisms. And just as when the microscope revealed and was responsible for germ theory so we could understand microbes as the basis for infectious disease,
and the importance of washing your hands. Doctors wouldn't wash their hands until recently.
Exactly. Between delivering babies and surgeries, and then they just had no idea how to understand things like the plague. It was either the wrath of God or the work of Satan or whatever. But now we know, okay, there is a technology, a medical technology can be built on the phenomenological fact of infectious disease caused by microbes. So if we say that psychological disorders and neuroses, everything on the spectrum from schizophrenia to the impulse to abuse sexually to bulimia and anorexia, all these things, let's say, are actually the handiwork of, as of this moment, invisible to most people, entities, organisms that have an impulse to reproduce and to colonize like any other organism. And the question is, do you want to have a culture whose practices of purification and disinfection are working, or do you want to be in a culture where you've been betrayed by the holy priest class who is supposed to protect you from spiritual infection and who has failed and actually been hijacked and used to propagate it. Exactly. So there you have, what the Pope calls the sacrilegious cult of child abusers within the ranks of the Catholic Church, which is and
it's in Judaism, it's in Islam,
it's in everything. Yeah.
So what does a person do when they even suspect, because even suspecting that you might have these symptoms, everyone likely has these parasites to some degree, but when you suspect that you're being overwhelmed with these, what are some of the things that you can do, and what was the stages of awareness that you encountered, and how could you apply that to others and their stages?
How do we fight back and win? Here it goes. So thank you for holding the space, for getting deep into the really gory and icky details of this fact. And I feel like I have been it's not in vain. The way that I suffered, it's not in vain, because now here's the good news. This is how we fight back, and this is how we save souls with more ancient technologies than Christianity. Let's say this is real salvation, ancient, deeper salvation technologies that I have discovered, and I've held my grace. I have held my, for many years, celibacy, and I've learned how to not be like a sexual predator on any level, really, even just with the impulse to get laid or whatever, and to what it's like. Once you really start to observe the impulse to sexually dominate someone on any level, it starts to feel like a lower, darker vibration. It doesn't feel like honoring. It doesn't feel sacred. And so so here's the good medicine, the good news, and the ability to, extend that healing grace that I have been, blessed to experience. So fast forward 20 years later, there I am, without a soul, but fighting the good fight, not being an abuser, and being a god, basically being initiated as a goddess worshiper. And first I was worshiping Gaia, worshiping the earth goddess spirit, and having the acts and the deeds of, being close to the earth, growing food, and teaching people how to do that, became a way of getting more healing energy into my system. But I was still sort of unconsciously struggling with, just the PTSD symptoms, and and that sense of just being depleted energetically, and not knowing why is it that I feel like so stuck or so blocked, and my energy's blocked, and I've been like unable to really function at work, at jobs, just like being broken down, and obviously I should expect that, you're not going to walk away from what happened to you and not be crippled in a lot of ways. But I tried to, keep up with everyone else and just live life and do my thing, and just kind of, limp along, but sort of fake it, no one can see that I'm actually limping, because I'm sort of smiling through it, and I'm sort of faking that I can walk normally, but I'm like suffering and struggling. And in this next sort of important visual episode, of an event that happened, I have been studying and practicing Tantra for several years, and learning how to make the act of lovemaking be a sacred act where you're putting devotional energy and prostration into your beloved, and that goes both ways. So I become a goddess worshiper of the woman in front of me, and she becomes a god worshiper of the man in front of her, and you're giving each other permission to co-worship and to believe and to know that really, as a living human being, you're just imbued with divine essence, and that's what Namaste, really means. You see the beauty and the spirit in each other. So practicing that technology, I had basically a massive breakthrough experience of sexual healing that I didn't anticipate, and I had to study quite a bit more to understand what happened. But and it also became the basis of what I would use as the word tantradelic, tantra as a spiritual practice that, when accompanied with a psychedelic sacrament, gives you a third eye perspective, so you can see the Kundalini serpents, and you can see the Shakti energy currents flowing, and you can see the demons, and you can see the spiritual warfare happening in front of you, inside of you, and all around you. And so there was this dance I was doing with this woman. It hadn't even become sexual in terms of genital energy. We were just holding space, loving each other, dancing, and I'm basically intuitively knowing, with some being possessed by the Shakti energy, being possessed by the divine feminine energy, and holding space and creating, trust and love around this container, and just really putting all of your heart, pouring all of your heart into a dance with a woman, and intuitively aligning our chakras, and really sort of clearing and moving energy around, so that we could have this docking of ports within our chakra systems. And I didn't really, at that point, I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't expect what was going to happen next.
You were just dancing with someone.
I was just dancing with someone, but with the tantrical principles of being like, I'm worshiping you. I'm here to please you. I'm not forcing a will of sexual impulse on you. There's no lust coming from me. There's no predator energy coming from me. So you can feel safe to really get free and relax and start to really pull up and start to become a Niagara of that Shakti energy. And so I unknowingly was like really just going with this flow. This is so exquisite, so orgasmic without even genital friction. This is like full body energetic orgasm that's happening just through dancing and purifying the intentions. And so that grace that was created resulted in what I now call a chakra douche, a massive hydraulically pressurized expulsion of the offending creatures within the chakra system by a blast of divine feminine energy that you access by this technology, this ritual. Talk about the technology of ritual, and basically to her eyes, what she saw was that it looked like I was dying. It looked like I was convulsing and having a seizure, foaming at the mouth, crying profusely, crunched up into a fetal ball, but like upwards. So I'm basically like, looks like I'm fighting, a dragon or something. I'm really in the thralls of exorcism, and what I was perceiving, so that's her perspective. Is that okay? Well, that was not. This is not very romantic. This guy is like having a sort of fit of some sort of look like epilepsy or something. It looked like I wasn't flailing.
And this was during the middle of the dance. You just
well, this is we mellowed out the dance, and I didn't want to impose sexual energy, and we were just sort of meeting, we were getting to know each other. So it wasn't. It would not have been appropriate. I mean, I don't know. She was.
But you were physically on the floor convulsing and like if you had been poisoned.
Well, no, yeah, I should say the way that it scaled down is that, her sexual energy was rising and she was getting more, towards the genital action, and I kind of rejected that gently and just said, no, let's just rest. We're not ready for this in our relationship. We haven't really earned that degree of like responsibility to dock the genital pores, but we dock the heart port, so we dock the chakras throughout the chakra system, but let's leave that and let's just rest. And I laid down and I was vibrating so powerfully. I never, I was like, a freight train vibrating so powerfully, and then all of a sudden I'm looking up at the ceiling, and this thought form, this sort of voice comes to me and says and asks me to now go into those memories, like that I'm now equipped and armed with enough love and light that I can survive knowing what actually happened.
And this is 20 years later, after not having addressed them really at all, just trying to put the past away, and then all of a sudden you have this dance, and then a voice is asking you to look at something that you hadn't even thought of looking in nearly 2 decades.
Exactly. And then then there was this violent expulsion, which you depicted in your art, that shows the man that has the torso, and below it it's just this explosion of this astral ecology of noxious creatures that you wouldn't want to drink the pond water of. So that explosion was absolutely visceral. In my third eye, I could see, instantly after that thought form arose, like, go into that wound and look at what's there. And then in the third eye's perspective, my 2 eyes, binocular vision eyes, are closed, and my third eye is fully open and totally directed into this domain, and I have this. Then I experience the peristaltic hydraulic pressurized douche action that blasts these entities past my third eye, or my third eye is seeing them blast out of my heart chakra, basically, and with extreme pressure, and it's like a grenade was blown off in my chest, and it felt painful and extremely eviscerating to the tissue. And I felt the creepy crawlies, most of them get blasted away and into the abyss, but some of them still sort of crawling around, slithering around. And for days after I had those visceral sensations, something in my nervous system switched on to give me tactile sensation their movement, and I could feel them sort of, the survivors of the.
And we're not talking about like tapeworms or stomach parasites. This is completely energetic, etheric, spiritual,
but very real and biological, just on another frequency, their perspective of me is much different than my perspective of them. Let's say they see this soul that has these chakras, that are producing energetic outputs from them, and they're like, oh, that's my, snack bar.
Because they don't have access to that energy themselves. They've somehow been turned off or created, and they don't have access to that, what I consider is the God energy, the creative force of the universe, and which we're all tapped into, or should be, and they're just there to get a free ride.
Exactly. There's, just as above, so below, as within, so without. However you want to look at it, it's all fractal. The ecology is extending in every direction, and there's, it's that was the intersection for me of understanding that that mental illness is a biological, not a chemical issue. And the chemical issue we can observe scientifically in the laboratory, and psychiatrists can tweak and mess around with and screw with all that stuff. But if they don't acknowledge the biological fact of infesting parasitic entities that are manipulating, and as you said, they're fostering the thought forms. They want more greed, they want more exploitation, they want more lust, more envy, jealousy. So like most people who do not have a spiritual practice of silencing their thought stream and knowing and having the perspective of what it's like to witness how alien and how absurd and how noxious and toxic these offending thought forms are, whether of all across the spectrum. From road rage, road rage is demonic possession, and because you're not of your essence, you're not holding a space of witnessing and compassion. And so that's why all the techniques of breath work and all the techniques of meditation from all the world traditions are, and the ecstatic trance dancing from the deeper, more ancient shamanic traditions, those are the techniques that give us the perspective on how to disidentify, in the words of Eckhart Tolle, that's to disidentify from these thought forms and this stuff. So I should go on to the next. So that was the sort of explosive revelatory experience that I should say is happening all over the world as we speak right now, as more victims of sexual abuse seek out tantric sexual healing modalities where they're receiving energy massage, either hands-on or hands-off, or a combination of both, from certified and trained healers who are able to, in some cases professionally, bring people into the same state that I've stumbled myself into.
And it's not even through intercourse.
Not even through intercourse. Just can be completely energetic, or it can be hands-on. And that's a whole nother topic of discussion, and what I've done extensive research to sort of understand how ancient ritual and modern clinical laboratory methodology can be synthesized, so we can have safe environments to begin doing this mass purification that we need to do.
What if someone wants to begin, yet they don't have a tantric partner and they don't know where to seek? They're somewhere in Nebraska where there's no healers at all. Or not saying that there's no healers in Nebraska. I just randomly tried to pick a place where, someone who's at home.
It's not Santa Monica.
We're a little bit spoiled here on the West Coast because there is a lot of that healers available. However, if you're in a place where you don't have access to these kind of people, and what do you recommend for those isolation, people who need healing and need to do it on themselves first?
Okay, well, I have some good advice there, I believe, from what I've gone through. But let me first. Your question will be answered through the course of getting through a couple more scenes of revelation, you could say. So that happened. And that was all hell breaking loose. You know what I mean? I didn't know if I just let a bunch of demons into the neighborhood. I didn't know where those things were going to go. If I'm now responsible for a pandemic or something, like, my God, have I been? So I was losing my mind. I shut down my life. I quit my band. I stopped everything. And I just went deep into into seeking answers. And luckily I had built, already sort of a network of people who were there at the right time, who were my angels to help me. These were, goddesses in the tantric traditions, and, I had a sexological body worker friend who was able to, I was able to work with to varying degrees, and as far as understanding things, and so I just made it my life now to figure out what the hell just happened to me, and so then the next scene that's relevant is that I knew I needed to get into an ayahuasca ceremony and to have, hands-on healing work done by trained shaman in the tradition of the Amazon, and because I had experienced that many times before. In fact, my psychedelic shamanic journeys that I luckily was starting to access, what I went into the street to find, 20 years later, I started to actually find it. Traditional psychedelic shamanic ceremonies where healers that are authentic and trained in ancient modalities were providing services of disinfecting the soul and bringing love and light into people's energy systems and sealing and repairing their chakra fabric and protective web. So I had been in various ceremonies where I had been slowly working my way up to this.
So this is all in the LA area, or?
Yeah.
So you have to go to Brazil to seek this out?
No, some people that can afford it, it's recommended to go to Peru for ayahuasca, because it's, the jungle setting and the tradition and the lineage is obviously as authentic as it gets. But I was blessed to, discover various ceremonial, opportunities, and over the course of several ceremonies I have been guided more towards these deeper wounds, but I still didn't know what I was going to be dealing with. I had started to see visions of parasitic entities and organisms really representing fear and paranoia. I had become very fearful. I mean, so for me, I wasn't in a incestuous, backwoods family of, let's say the typical stereotype of rural America, where there's all kinds of vile, incestuous stuff going on. That wasn't my reality, so it wasn't my destiny to become some serial pattern family abuser down the line. My reaction was to just be extremely fearful of men, extremely on guard around all men, and to really for myself develop more of a yin energy as a man since those events, and to become a goddess worshiper, and to really try to approach women. I can't say I'm perfect or that I'm a saint or that I haven't had my history of unconscious behavior that has been harmful in relationships. Absolutely own that. Absolutely a work in progress. Striving to be more graceful and more, but always consensual. I can hold that truth for myself, that having been brutally victimized, I am one of the good guys who says this will not happen by my hands, and I will train men and women to avoid these tragedies for the rest of my life and become a warrior for self-defense and for healing and for prevention. So anyway, I was mentioning that because the fear, I saw what looked like mites that were basically producing most of my fear and paranoia and agitation and my inability to just be in my own skin, because I'm so afraid of everything. And when I was on the street, it was of being afraid of going to sleep in the alley and have some guy his hands down your pants when you wake up with some guy's hands down your pants, or being stalked or being chased or being enclosed and trapped. I mean, I got out of many extremely near-death sexual predatory situations when I was on the street. Survived them, and sometimes I didn't survive, or sometimes I didn't get away, but I still survived. So
those kind of bad guys are out there.
Oh yeah, they're out there. And then those were the extreme cases, but really, the boyfriend who gives you too much booze is the same species, the same sexual predator entity, and that vibration and that abuse is constant. It is a constant of the astral ecology, and it's the species that are responsible for motivating and that behavior. And you could say that there is, that the untrained human male is on a course of lustful predation without the arts, so just like if without martial arts you're going to be a sloppy bar brawler, without the sexual arts you're going to be a womanizing predator,
which is almost encouraged by the culture.
Yeah, it's extremely so. So that kind of ties things together. But let me say that the medicine was starting to bring me into these deeper awarenesses of the parasitic nature of mental illness, and for me it was really manifesting as like a general fearfulness, a general paranoia, and like PTSD type symptoms. But because I had that sort of initiation into the ayahuasca ceremonies, once this explosive tantric healing happened, I knew I needed to go and get back into ceremony and like tell them what happened and have them know what they're dealing with, and that this is going to be.
These were the shaman involved in these ceremonies.
Yeah, and so there was the intention set for for me to receive a kind of very focused type of healing, and several men who I believe were trained Reiki healers and just had become absolute angelic healers in multiple traditions that were very complementary. They performed a group exorcism. What would look like if you went to a church where they're performing exorcisms? That's what it looked like, but they were using multiple technologies, and because of the medicine, the dimethyltryptamine based ayahuasca medicine, I was able to see with an enhanced third eye perspective the actual phenomenological facts of what's happening during an exorcism procedure, which is basically applying love, a trained lover, hopefully, applying divine, pure love, light energy into the subtle tissues of the auric field within and beyond the body as like a hornet's nest spray that is a repellent and a poison to the offending creatures that are nested within your soul and your chakras. Like you're basically blasting them, not with a poisonous toxic chemical like a bug spray, but you're spraying them with divine love light energy that is channeled through bringing it down through the crown chakra, bringing it up from the earth prana, and mixing and alchemizing those energies and having a graceful, way of being, so that you're not contaminating. Like a healer has got to have a practice of self-purification so that they don't cross-contaminate their clients and everything. So I felt that these were highly graceful beings that were working on me, and the proof was in the pudding. They were able to blast deep down and get a massive, way bigger, way more totalizing and complete like chunk of that reef or that nest out from the depths. And I watched it be pressurized and compressed through the central channel, the tubing connecting the chakras, and be expelled out through the crown into basically being dissolved, that mass being dissolved into the graceful container of the ceremonial environment. And what I didn't,
you just did with your hands, you made it look like a what you would wring out a wet towel, and then you just to document your hand gestures, you brought it up over your head and brought your hands out as if it was dissipating over your head.
Yeah. Now this is where the next important vision, or not vision, but next important procedure and event puts a new dimension onto even that. So let's say that there's a trust and a faith, let's say, that when you extract these entities from someone, which and I should describe what it looked like. It looked like the video game Contra, where you have these like you see, Geiger, your depictions of the dark realms and whatnot. It's very alive, it's very dense, and it's very, like, there are discrete, separate standing insectoid alien creatures and entities that are maybe the mature and adult stages of what is a more sort of
and there's
landscape,
larvae.
a larva. Yeah, there's all. It's just like, I mean, I would have mentioned like this. It's like if you see roadkill and you picked it up and you looked underneath it, you're going to see this massive, dense, just fast-moving ecology of maggots and all kinds of different fly larvas and all kinds of different creatures, like just having a heyday feasting on that. So that's going on inside of all of us. And there's people who have been wounded and traumatized to the point where that's almost all that's going on inside them.
Wow.
You know? So seeing that be purged, you know, and having it be forced and squeezed out, you in various, I guess, traditions where those technologies are being used to get that stuff out of there, there's like sort of a faith and confidence that there's enough love light energy around it that they will be evaporated or incinerated, or they will just have to find their way back into the abyss. But what I was still, I guess, that was a huge cleanup job. Like that was like having my transmission replaced, and the bluish liquid light of my soul, I was able to see it return, come down through the crown chakra and refill my physical body and start to, like, you know, wiggle my toes and move my fingers and blink my eyes, like as if it had been locked out of my body for 20 years, re-inhabiting my body. This is what it feels like to have a soul, you know, never knowing it had been shattered and lost. And
what was the difference, the main difference of feeling like you had a soul?
At that point, it was the sense that I have security and I have a sort of guard, watchful, sort of sanctified security field, like a force field now that's going to help continue to disinfect and purify and also to shield and protect. So now I'm like, that's why I was so attracting bad relationship. I mean, I attracted as many demonic women as I attracted angelic women, really, and I bless them all and I thank them all for what they've taught me. But it's like, now I know why I was so vulnerable to future attacks, or why the prostitute archetype haunted my business relationships and my romantic relationships.
And that could be very telling for someone who finds themselves repeating the same kind of patterns, and if you have a question about like why do all my girlfriends have X in common, or why do all my boyfriends seem to be the same person just over and over again, and this could be a tremendous insight that it's because they're attracted to those energies that you're working out, or maybe they're mutually beneficial, or are these people just coming to you to wallow in the filth with you? Or
misery loves company, and if you leave stagnant water out, it's going to attract mosquitoes anywhere in the world, and it's going to turn into an anaerobic bog that stinks, and it'll
such a great way to say
itself.
It.
Yeah, it's ecology. It is absolute ecology, and so that occurred. That healing occurred. My soul was returned to me, and then I felt like.
Now, did you see the world like different colors? Were things more vibrant, more sensory? Tell me about some of the side effects of being reintegrated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes, it was. I mean, I have to give more credit to the process of deliverance through some of the Abrahamic traditions, where they really are assembling a group of people who are intentionally there to like just spoil you with love, so that you melt down and you melt all your defenses and you stop trying to hide your shadow and you surrender and you release, and then you loosen up enough so that all that love that's been put into your system can actually make the demons flee, and then you feel that you've been delivered, and then you will worship whatever they tell you is responsible for what just did that. For me, I would say it's more, it isn't as simple as just God and Jesus and there's much more out there that are in the shamanic sort of many different relationships with different types of entities that can perform different tasks in that setting.
Do you think that all of these insectoid entities are negative?
No, this is where it gets to the fun part. The really mind blowing. Like if this wasn't crazy enough, I mean, the next level of my initiation, let's say, that I was now ready for. I'll explain, which is that my ability to manifest, my ability to just love and nurture and forgive myself, and just blossoming and more beauty and more understanding really what patterns had been keeping my life in certain ways like dysfunctional, and just starting to slowly, it's not, it's still, and it wasn't everything. I mean, it was like it was the most dug in, big nest chunk that was brought out, but still just a battle and not the war. And I knew and know it's an ongoing, it takes many, many lifetimes, to tell you the truth. I mean, we're talking about a reef of demonic nested demons so big.
some of these things can you come into this life having not had your negative experiences yet, still carrying these entities from 10 lifetimes ago?
Absolutely. And I think everyone, unless you're living in an intact village-based society that has maintained a protective orb around all of the members of your culture with adequate love, healthy sexuality, natural living, intactness with nature, those people, like, that's why I want to do laboratory research, to say, okay, let's take someone who's living in that integrity of nature and habitat, a wild human being in the natural habitat who has shamanic technologies to stay safe and healthy and hygienic, and put them next to some homeless guy who's got Tourette's and perform a spiritual procedure on them and see what the measurable differences are. There are going to be all kinds of things that fly out of that home bum when you apply these techniques, and then the hunter-gatherer should be whistling and not even noticing it.
Right, and so you're saying that the homeless person is more likely to have had a history of drug use that weakened their aura, that blocked their soul's ability to integrate, that now they're filled to the brim with these, and the Tourette's are really a manifestation of all these writhing entities that are just taking a stab at the wheel and not mindless, soulless creatures that are just, and really he's not crazy, but he's a victim of these things. So another thing, what about people who they are attracted to these negative sexual practices, and hence why 50 Shades of Grey, this whole BDSM lifestyle is now like gaining popularity, I'd say, is because people and it's possible to even feel like, well, was I molested as a child, or like, where do these feelings come from? And you're suggesting that it might not even have been a childhood from this life. It could have been, who knows, these things follow you through incarnations. You're saying they're attached to your
and your family's karma too. I have a lot of thoughts about that particular sort of that phenomenon, and whether or not there's a difference between exorcism or there's a difference between exorcising your demons and exercising your demons, and I'll let that just sort of steep about sexual practices and how much love and consciousness and light you're bringing to what is an act that is essentially, any sexual activity can transmit sexually transmitted demons. And
as well as diseases. And some diseases might be a physical manifestation of these hyperdimensional entities.
I absolutely believe that. And
so where you could have something attached to your chakra, it manifests as a cyst.
Yes, absolutely.
On your physical, that you can see.
Yep. It's very possible that those are actually demonic habitats in a physical structural form that we could possibly, look at them.
Whereas if you looked at it with an electron microscope, you would see these entities of virus, which look like geometric. They look like. Anyway, so if you look through with that lens, you see those geometric virus cells. But if you look through it with the shamanic lens, you would see this parasitic entity.
Yeah, hyper intelligent, by the way, because they have way more. intellectual wherewithal than we do. They're spanning, and not all of them. I mean, there's like, it is an ecology and various entities.
There's all sorts of...
There's dumb ones, there's smart ones, there's fast ones, there's slow ones. They all sometimes conspire. Sometimes they're warring, sometimes they're vying for the best place. It's like pigs in a trough.
And then sometimes you're saying there's these more intelligent ones who are using all of them together in order to create an effect.
Yeah.
And sometimes the lower ones will attract a bigger one that's more in control.
Yeah.
And so again, what if someone feels like they're under this influence and they don't have access to healers, shamanic tools? They're in a town where even smoking a joint is going to land you in jail. What can they do on their own right now in their home?
Okay, I'm so glad you asked that question, because it reminds me how important it is to set up this next scene that happened, which is that, okay, I had that experience, and then I was like, but now I have, a lifetime of reproducing that effect in with my daily life, and like I'm gonna live a more spiritual life, but I realize this is out of reach even for my budget. I can't do what I should do. Basically, at that point, I knew, like, okay, now I know why affluent people are, let's say a lot of times what's happening now is that an affluent person with means, financial means, has had some sort of chronic mental disorder, malaise, but they've been successful despite it. And they go to a Reiki healer, and the Reiki healer is just like bringing, love, energy, and healing energy and intention into their energy field, and then boom, childhood sexual abuse, trauma, memories surface, and it blows up in their face, and they experience what I experienced, but they're not on a psychedelic, so they don't actually see the demonic creatures per se. They just see the flashbacks of their father or their uncle or the neighbor or whatever, and then they freak out. And then and some of them who are lucky, get discover that they can go to the Amazon and spend months in massive deep purification of the soul, with just night after night of deep medicine journeys, and they're basically getting their fabric of their tissues of their soul and their chakras and their physical body like really cleansed. But that's going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars. And if you look at the rate of abuse that's happening, we need a people's, revolutionary sort of open source technology for this stuff. And my background as an organizer, as a protester, as a warrior and activist for liberation for the people, I say to myself, wait a minute, I was able to induce a purge with $5 worth of mushrooms and a tantric dance partner. I didn't have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to actually succeed at inducing the same effect. And the difference between what I experienced with that woman, and one, a few less than a handful of mushrooms, was what it would cost thousands of dollars, to reproduce. And I'm looking at it from a medical perspective. What do we have here? Foaming at the mouth, purging, contractions, convulsions, and things where, like, there is a phenomenological effect of what's happening, the purge. So how do you...
What about someone who would say, well, that's just because you ate poison mushrooms?
Most of the time, you're not going to induce a massive purge like that by recreationally consuming mushrooms, because you're not really going to be allowed to go there. I would say, for the most part, that's not if that's not happening every day. There was a synergistic effect between the tantric ritual and the mushrooms that was able to, for a low price, a DIY, do-it-yourself, empowering sort of methodology to be able to do what it costs a lot more to do in traditional ayahuasca ceremonies. But don't do this at home. I'm just with the disclaimer. I'm not saying everyone run out and do this. I'm saying someone give me the grant funding to do this research in a laboratory so we can compare, these modalities and be able to progress and build technology with it. But people's technology, not proprietary pharmaceutical drug company technology or out of reach
couldn't you do this too with just breath of fire? If you're, you can't even get access to any psychedelics at all. Can you just do this through watching some Kundalini meditation videos on YouTube and doing your breathing techniques?
I'd say that yes. The reason for me to want to, I'd say be brave and courageous and to amplify and to open up the perspective on it is because I'm an activist and I want to defeat and be successful in war to defeat these entities, so I'm willing to be on the edge with this. But if you're, let's say, less adventurous or less, I don't want to say brave as in you're a coward, but if you're like, you know what, I don't think I'm ready, I don't want to have nightmares about what this shit really looks like. I just want to feel better and I want to live graceful, then by all means keep the third eye closed. You don't want to go there unless you really are ready to take on that responsibility for yourself, and it's not easy. And I'll tell you now, I've done enough work that it's like practically dilated all the time. I close my eyes and I see stuff flying around the astral plane, and I see it like looks like a submersible in the bottom of the ocean. I see what you draw when I close my eyes.
Well, sometimes I see, like, on a drunk person, like, I could see it looks like a giant centipede wrapped around their neck and like actually like attached to their face, and they're all like, talking shit, and they're all like, I'm like, what the? And I'm in shock. I'm like, what? Am I crazy? Or, so just to round this all up into a nice big thing, there are absolutely these entities, and they do get involved when you're lowering your energy, your pranic energy, through drug use, through alcohol. Not that drug use and alcohol are bad, but there are definitely things that are weakening. Just as they'll weaken your immune system and you'll catch a cold, they will weaken your auric system and you'll catch a parasite.
Right.
And now, how does someone find when they're in the presence of a positive entity? What does that feel like? Versus like these bad emotions? What does like a positive reptilian or angelic? Let's talk about that.
Okay, cool, perfect. This is again, you're saying all the perfect setups for this, and so now I'm gonna try to get less analytical and more just descriptive here. So, but I want to tie these pieces together because it is a very sequential like initiation over time. So I'm saying, okay, now I know what unifies this thing. There is this thing called the purge, and it's very elusive, and it's more effective when group energy is going on, and it can. I did not know it can be induced with the mushroom, and that to me was like a breakthrough, because I had purges on ayahuasca in that ceremony, and that's what its signature effect is. The ayahuasca signature effect is the purge, but I never had heard ever before of anyone having a purge on the mushroom. So that was groundbreaking for me. So I decided that I was going to continue to self-care, to self-medicate, and design my own ritual around mushroom and the elusive purge with the mushroom. And I attracted into my life a representative in the flesh of the goddess Kali from the Hindu tradition and the tantric tradition. And I hadn't, in my tantric training up to that point, really been connected with the goddess Kali, which was a shame and sort of, I would say, like really
you didn't feel worthy.
Disservice. Well, it's like you go to a yoga studio and they don't talk about applying this to your sex life because it's been Christianized, really, is what it is. And then if you go to a tantra studio, they're going to be saying to you that essentially, I mean, don't take this the wrong way, but there are people who will say this in a much more like derisive and forceful way. But I'm going to say it in as gentle a way as I can. But I will basically say that the white tantra yoga, that is what most people are doing out there, is the kids' version of what would, in the ancient traditions of tantra, blossom into the red tantra yoga, where that conditioning of white yoga would give you the power to, and the flexibility to endure the high voltage currents of the sexual energy that you would then be practicing sexual yoga with in the ancient progression. And now we're sort of stuck at the Christianized kids version of yoga, and you have just a lack of full development there. So anyway, I was practicing Tantra, but the next level for Tantra is that it's not just about better sex and more spiritual sex. At a deeper level, and I don't want to impose this on anyone, but I will say that the way I see it and the way what I've studied about it is that really, traditionally in Hindu Tantra, there was a sort of directive to devote yourself to a deity, and the goddess Kali was the supreme deity for, I would say, let's just say a lot of the devotees were worshiping Kali, and so her ability to disinfect and purify the soul, and to devour demons, and to slay demons, and to provide liberation, and to slay the ego, to slash down the ego, and deliver the devotee into a state of bliss through sexual union with her, through sexual union with oneself, through sexual union with a partner or partners. She is sort of the beneficial predator, like a ladybug in the garden of the soul. So when you sing her mantras, or when I'm going to say, bring it back to myself, as a modern, white man who's dabbling in sexual healing and shamanism, and starts to discover this rabbit hole of Tantra, which is very, as yoga, it's very sort of whitewashed, let's say, or it's very Disneyfied. It's very Disneyfied or whatever. And then you have Tantra, which is like something that's sold as a professional, like, life coaching service and way to have better sex and more abundance. Yet the confronting the shadow aspect of Tantra, which is working with Goddess Kali to heal your soul, to kill and slay and devour the demons that these are parasites. So they, I can't. So this is what happened. I'll describe it. A Hindu Kali worshipper woman enters my life, and in an exchange of like healing services for each other, we become very good friends, and we become sort of experimental shamans for each other. And we designed a ritual procedure to use the sacramental mushroom in conjunction with sacred, ancient, authentic goddess invocation mantras, and her very highly skilled and authentic training in energy healing and pranic healing and yoga. And what happened, this is where I want to describe what gets very visual, is that we walked ourselves into an absolute episode of extreme carnage of spiritual warfare. She was able to become fully possessed by this Kali entity, which animated her to behave literally like a raccoon raiding a nest. And so this physical woman standing over me, turning into a howling beast, engaged in invisible spiritual combat, using her hands configured as claws and her tongue rolling out, and actually devouring, as a sort of hybrid between her physical human form and her higher possessed Kali, like what you're drawing, that sort of suit, that higher dimensional intersection of physical biology as a human being, and then this sort of goddess entity, combining those two, calling her in to basically give you the big guns to do this work in ceremony. That's what happened. And we blew the lid off the universe, man. It was the Yoniverse. And then she was possessed and channeling and speaking and giving me commandments and giving me this like gospel of Kali.
And now you're integrating this into, you're making trance music, beats, and you're saying that these all in conjunction are going to help heal people who may be feeling like they're possessed with these things?
Yeah, well, we're worshiping the goddess Kali together, and it is her. She then possesses the female woman, and I'm the male on the ground, bowing, praying, holding her feet. She's doing this massive raid, and I'm seeing now what I didn't see. What I didn't see in that ayahuasca ceremony was like it was like they were getting squeezed out of me, and then they were being expelled into the abyss. But this time, they were being raided with military force, like shock and awe. Kali is here to rip apart all these nests and send them. They try to run, she grabs them and throws them in her mouth and chews on them and laughs and spitting out their astral blood. You know, I mean, this is absolute carnage.
Sounds very similar to their depictions.
Yeah, and then also the involvement of the Kundalini. So from what she's saying, what she reported, and we recorded the lab report. It's on my podcast. The podcast is sexual. Yes, sexual healing with psychedelic goddess worship, I believe, is the title of it. And where we recorded each other debriefing about what we just experienced. And so from her perspective, she's ripping open a nest and eating demons out of my soul, the ones that are, obviously, like I said, it's going to, it's still lifetimes of amalgamated mass within this reef. And so we're just starting to scratch the surface. She's coming down, eating the demons, snacking on the demons, doing me a favor, mutually beneficial ecological relationship, like calling in a ladybug to eat the aphids off your green leafy plants. And I'm seeing these demonic aphids, parasites, face to face, and they're scared shitless because they're about to be eviscerated and torn apart by a higher dimensional beneficial predator in the garden of my soul now. Wow. So that was the question mark that I had is like, God, now I know how to perform exorcisms on myself and other people, but isn't there an ethical dimension of responsibility to where this infectious material finds its way out to in the world? Wouldn't you want to pre-arrange the invocation of a higher dimensional predator who's going to clean up like a leech on a wound, or maggots in a wound, which, if we just look at it as a medical technology, right? Back when gangrene was, killing soldiers and stuff, they would put leeches on those wounds, and the leeches would do a beneficial job of eating that infectious material. Yeah. So let's say that, these mantras for me, and I dare to extrapolate that the ancient tantrics were doing this with other psychedelic compounds, but they were seeing and they were depicting it. And when I read the Bhagavad Gita, where they talk about the multiple, they're describing exactly what I see and exactly what you're seeing, which is like there is a terrible, terrifying true form of these gods and goddesses, and really they dwarf us in their astral dimensions, and they have multiple eyes and multiple arms and multiple, what I was seeing is like mandibles. They're actually able to go in there and they see that you're a poor human who's like suffering because you're infested with demons. Well, if you can charm them to come and help you, they'll be happy to grub on that and get it out of the way so that you can grow your soul back. You can have a life again, and then the more you devote yourself, the more you become. I guess, like, I don't want to say the ancients did this. I've started to do it, and now I'm with a scientific mind trying to verbalize it and put it into
the word
discourse.
Scientific is just a modern way of describing this.
Translating it beyond faith, yeah, so it's repeatable in laboratory conditions,
That's amazing. So we've just gone full circle and reached so many different levels with this. So the result of doing this kind of work, even though it's icky and it's gross and it's very painful in some cases, it's going to result in you feeling better, you feeling lighter, and having new perspective and not being burdened by these just negative thoughts, negative habits, negative feelings altogether.
Absolutely. The word is liberation, and it unifies my whole life because I've been a punk fighting in the streets, fighting in the forest to save trees. I feel like to discover that there is, I mean, I denied all spirituality whatsoever. I consider myself like a Marxian atheist, the religion's opiate of the masses, and let's just destroy the system. Maybe we can get close to the earth spirits again, and we'll start hearing voices on the wind or something, and maybe we'll get lucky in that way. But I believed in animism. As an anthropologist, I say, okay, intact village or hunter-gatherer societies, they have authentic relationships with the spirits of their natural ecology and the spirits beyond the natural ecology into supernatural ecology, if you want to call it that, or whatever you want to call it. But for me, I didn't have a relationship. I could hug a tree and feel like, oh, hopefully it knows that I love it and hopefully it loves me, but I wasn't in communion with it, on a shamanic level, let's say, for most of my life. But now I feel like the importance of having a spiritual practice, of having spiritual awareness and spiritual hygiene is important, because a lot of activists have really arrogant egos, and they don't see that that's actually feeding demonic parasites to behave that way. So there is a sweet spot for being a warrior that isn't condescending and judgmental and hypercritical of other people's paths, and I'm sort of, I'm like trying to make sense of all this, and it is very healing, and it's empowering to know that you don't have to pay the drug companies to drug you with pharmaceuticals. You don't have to pay a talk therapist to run you around in circles on the surface of your mind for 20 years and take all your money while you're still struggling with this. Like, who is going in there, reaching in there, ripping the demons out and eating them? Is your psychiatrist going to do that for you? Then they're frauds. Then Terence McKenna said that, if I can remember the quote, it's something to the effect of, psychologists should be prosecuted for fraud if they're not integrating the psychedelic experience, because they don't know what the fuck they are dealing with and what is going on this planet. They're completely locked into this orthodox medical clinical framework that denies all existence of the biological fact, the phenomenological biological fact of parasitic demonic entities, man. And the ancients knew it, man. They said, oh, you got demons? Here, go to the cave and worship Kali, and she'll love you. So now I got another another dimension, which is that after this non-sexual raid, where she was also releasing kundalini snakes, and I could feel and see the serpent rise through me and push out through me, like I was extremely not, in addition to being in prostration bowing to her, I was also like jacked into by the kundalini snakes that she was releasing. So she was in effect like had a team of raiders, and part of that team was the kundalini snake that was plunged through me.
Wow.
and exploding. And basically it's like, so if you were a hunter, you would send your dog to go perform tasks for you. So if she's releasing snakes, which she said, yes, releasing snakes to eat and consume these demonic predators and pests. So she comes in and like just lets them all out, and then the demons, what are they going to do? I mean, I had a garden once where there were a lot of gophers, and a friend of mine who was a naturalist came and brought me a gopher snake, and together we released it into the gopher holes, and that is what that's about too, the kundalini. Wow. So it's another dimension of predator-prey relationship that we can design, intelligently. But now I get to kiss and tell. I have to tell you about the love making with Kali that I have experienced. Okay. Which is like, makes it all worth it.
Just as a side note, this has taken you a year for us to put this together, for you to do this research, and you and I have been talking about this, I think it's well over a year. Yeah. So I respect that, so I'm very curious to hear this aspect of what you've come to discover.
Right. So what I have recently started to, like in the last several months, access, which makes it all worth it, and I would take all of the suffering that I have had in this and all the previous lifetimes, I would take it all 10 times over if the result was this gem and this gift, which I consider to be like the ultimate blessing that I could ever imagine, and beyond anything I ever imagined, is that I have been essentially initiated by this transdimensional being, which was described by the Hindus as the goddess Kali, and who is able to take a human form it's able to possess a human being, and also in the mind's eye or in the third eye, in the ritual devotion to her, I've been able to phase. She's, I guess I could say she's phased in and out of beautiful, sensuous, physical, female, erotic forms for my pleasure, for my arousal and my excitement. She has presented herself to me as like a goddess of the nature of you, as you depict, a very like shamanic and beautiful, gorgeous, loving being, and so she has essentially had this effect, and I would say it comes down to a sentence that I feel like through visions and through action, she has shown me what I would translate into this following statement of her will, which is, feed me your demons, feed me your curses, those are the appetizers, the main course is your orgasm and your cum. And that is like would be enough to get me lynched by Orthodox Hindu devotees of the goddess Kali, but the reality is that when you go down the rabbit hole of Tantra and you read the descriptions that the ancients were describing, it is exactly that she is a sexual erotic goddess who is thirsty for our passion and our love, and the fact that what I've experienced is that she can come in, or she has been coming in, and I'm basically serving more and deeper chunks of the demonic reef to her, and in trade for that sort of she has her way with me, and she rocks my world. I mean, now and the actual genital architecture, the way that it's enveloping, it's beyond anything you can imagine. It's like beyond human sexual intercourse. It is an intercourse involving multiple dimensions of your unseen being, my unseen being, and to have the third eye activated with the psilocybin, I'm able to see her, see what she's doing, see how she can basically envelop my entire being and squeeze and pull and pluck and bite the demons out of me to give me a cleaner, more sensual and clear experience of what she really has to offer, which is this exquisite, it's just alien love making ritual activity that is just put an unbroken smile on my face, and all of the brokenness of my heart has been healed by her blessing, which I feel like nothing has been a greater honor to have that relationship. And now really the shadow aspects of my personality that I've struggled with are rapidly being alchemized and transmuted into literally more of her tissue being part of my tissue. So I'm kind of being absorbed by her on an ongoing basis, and there's huge implications for my sexual ethics now around what is happening, because now I see and feel myself and know myself to be partially, permanently, sort of angelically possessed by her. So it makes me have to think of myself as like, yeah, okay, don't get drunk and sleep next to women you don't know. Don't sleaze on people. Don't even impose your will on someone in bed. Like, now you have to just give this healing energy and just be, shamanic and saintly with your sexual energy, and you won't really need to be lustful and to chase people. Yeah, I've been seeking very spiritually refined partnership with more women in my life to share this experience with, because there ain't going to be no sloppy sex for me ever again. There's not going to be no unconscious wham bam thank you ma'am. Mm-hmm. It never was like that.
At a party.
Yeah.
Which so many people rely on.
Exactly. And what they don't know that they're doing unconsciously is they're spreading demons by creating they're docking ports, and they're not bathing those ports in divine love light energy, which is repellent to the demons. So the demons are actually pushing you towards lustful activity, and then you're fornicating, and it's warned that fornication is going to create hell on earth, and it does, so that's, but the thing that the ascetic religions have damned us with is the idea that, like, okay, sex can be very dangerous, so don't do it.
It's like, so now abstinence is the. It's
exactly.
not. You're saying it's.
No, it can be very graceful, and it can in fact be the most exalted state of spiritual union you can have with the divine beings. Like, they designed us to be fucking sex machines. That's why we can copulate out of the menstrual cycle. That's why we can have sessions of sexual intimacy that lasts for hours. We're designed to be the most erotic species in the history of the planet. So to not have a beautiful art form around that is the downfall of humanity, and that's why all of the sexual repression is manifesting as these hyper-abusive perversions. And then, I've studied Christians too. I read a book called Sexually Transmitted Demons by a Christian woman who was sexually abused, who was a prostitute, and who has made it her life's work to actually do the taxonomy of the spirits behind, or the demons behind perversion and whatnot. And I read her work and I say, I never in a million years would have ever thought I would be, saluting a Christian perspective on this stuff. But because of my punk background, how much all the dead Kennedys, I'm not gonna buy into that. But when I say, wait a minute, let's strip away the variable subjective stuff and let's get down to the ecology, which is phenomenological, and that's where we need to look at this. It's like, why isn't, okay, so like what I think it was, his name is Pat Robertson, right? Mm-hmm. Christian pundit dude. There was a headline where he comes out and says, be warned, watching pornography will invite demons to infest you, basically. He didn't say those words exactly, but he basically said, you watch porn, you're going to have demons, And of course the modern world would laugh at that, saying that's the most backward screwball.
But now there's all sorts of trouble that comes from too much porn watching.
Exactly. And the studies that are being done on porn addiction are getting people reporting that I was possessed by a dark entity, and now I'm not only watching more and more extreme porn, but now I'm going out and committing sex crimes. That the slippery slope from vanilla sort of just what you would consider to be wanting to see people having semi-normal sex to then bestiality and pedophilia and all these other extreme, and gang banging and all this extreme, even the monster porn and stuff, like that acceleration, the high-speed internet porn is accelerating the pathway from sensual erotica.
Corruption of innocence.
Exactly, and that is their game, and there is no. If you look at Sodom and Gomorrah, what that is trying to codify in a story, is how perilous, lustful, unconscious, unsacred sexual activity can become. And now we're seeing the cutting edge of that demonic, agenda to basically, turn any and everyone into a force of harm, and sexual harm is the worst harm, period. There's no harm that exists worse than that, because of how sensitive and how I can't even begin to explain it. It should be obvious to people that harming people sexually.
And everyone even talks about how awful they feel after and it always turns or not even just that, a couple hours in front of the porn machine, and you just feel drained, empty and drained and not good. It's not a good feeling.
Yeah.
Well, to round all this up, because we've gone on for 2 hours, and what I think is a phenomenal summation of things that I've only just thought in the back of my mind and have attempted to express through what I thought was just pure creativity in my artwork and paintings. It's incredibly validating to hear your perspective on this, and I really appreciate that it took you a lifetime to come to these revelations that, you know, healing can be experienced, and it's there for anyone who is ready to not be depressed, to say no to sadness, and cast off their own victimization. So, and I think to find out more about this music that you're creating to help in this situation, and to hear more of your own podcasts, and to keep track of what you're doing as an artist and as an activist, as a musician, and as an ecologist, they could go to
tantrapunk.com. tantrapunk.com.
And you've got the links to your music there?
Yeah, the music's there. There's music videos. There's actually a video that's a presentation. I mean, yeah, there's YouTube. There's
everything
a lot of
is
material,
there.
yeah. And then everything I've described, you know, most of it, there's a few things that are still, that this would be the debut of certain things, like the sexual intercourse with the divine goddess. That will be first. That's first being announced in this very moment.
Well, really, thank you for coming on Esoteric
Loud
Origins.
and proud.
Yeah, that's really amazing, and I totally appreciate you coming forth with this story altogether. I know it took a lot of courage and a lot of time for you to even come to a place where you were able to talk about it, let alone document it and share your story with the world, which I think is going to eventually be hopefully beneficial to a lot of people. And that's why we're doing this, to benefit people. And my art is also a technology for that goddess worship. Even though I was doing it independently of what Ben was doing, my prints and basically all of my art prints are meant to be interacted with on those exact same levels, although I wasn't doing as consciously as now I've been made aware of. But you know, you could look at tomdenney.com and see my art prints and interact with those for yourself. And so I think because you know, we all face these things, and sometimes when there's unnameable depressions, that maybe looking at this potential of this inner ecology and work that one can do on themselves is not only beneficial, but kind of apocalyptically relevant at this time. You might not just be saving your soul, but eternal aspects. I guess that's what the soul is. So, in summation, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, thanks, man. I'm so overwhelmed with beauty and joy right now. It's like makes me want to cry, because this is the conversation that boys and men and fathers, you know, I mean, need to be having with their families. Like, this is the world we live in. There's some really dark, nasty, negative stuff going on within it, and we really need to work together through the globally interconnected, you know, information age that we're in, to really design new, more feminist, religious, spiritual knowledge, you know, gnosis.
Not feminist,
you know?
but divine feminine.
There you go. Yeah, that word is has different meanings. Yeah. So let's open it up to a different word. Yeah.
The idea of feminism is actually a different masking of this imperialistic. You know, the idea of like, oh, well, you should get out and go become a CEO. That's not the divine feminine energy that we're talking about for women. We're talking about the motherly, maternal healer.
Right. Well, let me say just briefly on that, and then I'll actually I'll focus on a kind of closer. I have been a very avid scholar of feminist discourses and ideologies, and there's not one unifying form of feminism. Some of the camps, you could say, there's queer feminism, reformist feminism, there's liberal feminism, socialist feminism, anarcho-feminism, ecofeminism, and they're all in some ways pointing to different oppressions and trying to analyze them. And I would actually say that the tradition, or this sort of camp that I have been, of course, anarcho-feminism from punk rock. It's very prominent there. But if folks have not pursued an interest in ecofeminism, it is the branch, you could say, that is a lot of it is very concerned with understanding the history of goddess worship, the history of divine feminine energies and whatnot. So that's just sort of a semantic journey, but I hope that people do explore that, because it is the rebalancing. Let's say we're rebalancing masculine and feminine energy. There is no bad guy when we can do that. We don't need to demonize masculinity. We need to angelify masculinity, and that's going to be a process of giving and surrendering patriarchal power that was seized by violence and aggression, and actually rebalancing that. And I'll give a sort of conclusion, hopefully wrap everything together in some kind of conclusion. And I'd say, the spiritual people need to get more active. The active people need to get more spiritual. That's kind of a bumper sticker, So, for me, I could never have imagined becoming so sort of like wanting to understand, wanting to have spiritual rules. I wanted anarchy. I wanted liberation. I wanted just and in punk rock, because there's no real spiritual consciousness or awareness for the most part, at least embedded in the lyrics of the bands. I would never have encountered this stuff. Never would have encountered this stuff. I never would have encountered this stuff through the punk bands that I got into in the first generation. But let's imagine that, what if going to a punk show starts to, at least sometimes in some places, look like an ancient tantric puja ritual, where they're anchoring in powerful energy and designing with that mosh pit kundalini energy. And actually, that is exorcism, that is purification, that is kundalini energy, that is Shakti. And I've interviewed punk rock tantrikas who validate that claim and say, when we create the mosh pit, we're doing healing, we're exorcising demons, we're doing catharsis, and this is therapy, and it's cheap, and it's $3 to get in. It's like, we can own that, the beauty of that in punk rock, and actually deepen it and look at things more critically and bring more love to, like, hey, you know what? Let's not all become, die of cirrhosis of the liver. Let's moderate some things, and let's bring more sacred practice in, especially, the just the lower chakra sexual level of immaturity, and that can use some growth. So I'm hoping that, the future of punk and metal, let's say, where these empowerment and kundalini sort of releases are happening, there can be more spiritual hygiene and spiritual intelligence, to where we become more powerful warriors and better lovers too.
I love that, Ben. That is a no better way to wrap up this entire conversation. And thank you for sharing it with